My name is Monica Helms, and I'm the president of the Transgender American Veterans Association. This is part 2 in a series of documentary videos on transgender and transgender-like veterans. We changed the name for part 2 to Transgender and Transsexual Veterans of America because the women and men featured in this segment actually identify or identified as being transgender, cross-dresser, or transsexual. The one exception was the movie director Ed Wood, who referred to himself as a transvestite. That was the common term in the 1950s and 1960s. Since the making of Part 1, a major event took place when Congress passed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and President Obama signed it on December 22, 2010. The repeal will soon allow gay, lesbian, and bisexual people to serve openly in the military. However, the repeal did not address transgender, transsexual people serving in the military. They still cannot serve openly in the military, making them the last minority that the Department of Defense can discriminate against. Various rules and regulations still prevent transgender and transsexual people to join and to admit they are trans to anyone. Telling a fellow service member, a chaplain, a doctor, or a commander will still get you kicked out. It is our hope that this new video will show the public and the Department of Defense that transgender and transsexual people have already served this country and are still doing so this very day. It may make it easier for the Department of Defense to change their mind and allow transgender and transsexual people to serve openly like they do in several of our allied nations around the world. On top of all of that, Congress does not need to be involved. After the release of Part 1, we received an email from a trans man, Ox Freeman, pointing out that we missed an important individual from the Civil War, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. After reading about her life, we knew we had to include her in Part 2. Dr. Walker became the first and only woman in American history to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Her father believed women should not be required to wear restrictive clothing, so all through Mary's life, she supported clothing reform for women. Many times in her life, she dressed as a man and was even arrested several times for impersonating a man. Dr. Walker graduated from Syracuse Medical College in 1865. During the Civil War, she became an unpaid field surgeon for the Union Army front lines, carrying 2 pistols with her. In 1863, she was awarded a commission as a contract acting assistant surgeon. On April 10, 1864, she was captured by Confederate troops and arrested as a spy, then exchanged with other Union doctors for Confederate doctors. President Andrew Johnson awarded Dr. Walker the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1865, but in 1917, Congress changed the requirements to earn a Congressional Medal of Honor and asked Dr. Walker to return hers. She never did and kept it until she died in 1919. In 1977, President Carter reinstated Dr. Walker's Congressional Medal of Honor, and in 1982, the U.S. Post Office issued a stamp with her picture on it, wearing a dress. In Part 1, we saw women who dressed and acted like men so they could serve in the military. In Part 2, we'll introduce you to both men and women who, for the most part, lived their lives as the opposite of their birth gender after they finished their military service. The first 20th century person we are featuring was mentioned earlier, Ed Wood. Wood joined the Marines during World War II and in later life stated he wore a bra and panties into battle under his uniform. However, Wood's real claim to fame came after the war when he made a career in directing movies. His movies were so bad that in later years they became cult classics. Those movies earned him the title of Worst Director of All Times, long after his death in 1978. This clip out of Wood's movie, Glenn or Glenda, will probably seem eerily familiar to many transgender and transsexual veterans.
On his weekend passes, he would go to the nearest town where he had a suitcase checked in a public locker. In the suitcase, he had the things he loved to wear. that which made his body appear to be what his mind believed it was. Then the day of embarkation came. But wherever Alan went, the suitcase was sure to go.
Wood was speaking from experience. One of the most famous transsexual veterans was Christine Jorgensen. Jorgensen was drafted in the Army in November 1945, and even though that was after the Japanese surrendered on August 14, 1945, VA considers anyone who entered the military before December 31, 1946, as World War II veterans. Jorgensen made headlines in December 1952 when she arrived in New York City after a sex change operation in Denmark, now known as sex reassignment surgery or genital reconstruction surgery. She became the first publicly known transsexual and even knocked the testing of the first hydrogen bomb off the front page. One headline read, "XGI becomes blonde beauty." Jorgensen spent time in the entertainment business after she came back from Denmark and became an icon in the trans community. She wrote a book of her experiences called Christine Jorgensen, A Personal Biography, and died in 1989, just shy of her 63rd birthday. Another World War II transgender veteran is Jane Fee, G.I. Jane as she likes to call herself, first enlisted in the Pennsylvania Reserve Defense Corps in 1943. After moving to Maryland in 1944, she enlisted in the State Guard Brigade. Fee enlisted into the regular Army in 1946, just under the deadline to be considered a World War II veteran. Being one of the last people to become a World War II veteran, Fee has made a goal to be the last living World War II veteran. Jane Fee has been very active in the community throughout her life. She fought for LGBT rights in Minnesota in the 1990s, helping the state create one of the country's first fully inclusive non-discrimination laws. She was on the board of International Foundation for Gender Education, won the Transgender Law Conference Pioneer Award in 1994, and the Trinity Award in 1995. She became the first trans person to be a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 2000 and won the Virginia Prince Award in 2001. She is also the oldest member of the Transgender American Veterans Association. Transgender veterans have served during the Korean War, and one of them was Linda Bedore. She joined the Navy in 1950 and served on the USS Rodman, DMS-21, until she was honorably discharged in 1954. In just under 4 years, she reached the rank of pipe fitter first class. After the Navy, Bedore worked in construction and then owned a dune buggy shop in Arizona for 27 years and retired in 2004 at the age of 73. She raised 6 children. A Vietnam War transgender veteran, Tassie Zarek, served in the Air Force from 1964 to 1975 and got out as a captain. I came from a long line of military people, including my grandfather, father, uncles, brother, his son, and my son. Serving 8 years in the Navy, I was trained in naval nuclear power, stationed on 2 submarines, and got out as a submarine qualified machinist mate first class with an honorable discharge. I helped raise 2 sons. Shortly after starting my transition, I was thrust into activism in Arizona, then moved to Georgia in 2000. In Georgia, I became active locally and nationally and co-founded the Transgender American Veterans Association in early 2003. I created the Transgender Pride Flag in 1998 and was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 2004. During all of this, I have worked for the same telecommunications company for 21 years. One of the most interesting transsexual veterans is Diane Schroer, a highly decorated Army veteran. Diane spent 25 years in the Army and served in Special Forces as an officer. After 9/11, she was handpicked to operate a secret unit of 120 people dedicated to stopping terrorist activities. The job was intense, and occasionally she had to report to Vice President Dick Cheney on their activities. What makes Schroer notable in our community was the lawsuit she and the ACLU filed against the Library of Congress in 2005. The Library of Congress created a position to study terrorism in the world and needed someone to fill that position. The job was tailor-made for Schroer's extensive experience, and after several months of interviews, she was offered the job. However, when she told them she would be starting her transition from male to female, they rescinded the offer. The ACLU filed a lawsuit under Title VII sex discrimination and won the case in 2008. Schroer also appeared before the House Committee on Education and Labor to speak on LGBT job discrimination based on her experience with the Library of Congress. Autumn Sandine spent 20 years in the Navy and retired in 2000 as a fire controlman first class. During her 20 years, she served on 4 ships. In the last few years of her service, she was sexually harassed by men because she appeared too effeminate to them. Her executive officer tried to investigate her under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but she successfully fought it and won. Since retiring, Autumn has become one of the most respected bloggers in the LGBT community, writing for the award-winning blog Pam's House Blend. In 2010, she decided to take her activism to another level by chaining herself to the White House fence. She did that twice with other LGBT veterans in protest of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, even though its repeal would do nothing for transgender and transsexual people. She was arrested both times. Now that Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been repealed, she has become a strong advocate for allowing transgender and transsexual people to serve openly in the military. Sir Jesse McNulty joined the Army in 1985 and was trained as a military police officer. However, his photojournalistic talents were quickly recognized by his command. McNulty ended up writing and editing for the military community newspaper, The Town Crier, and the 18th Engineer Brigade's Sword and Castle. In 1987, he was named 21st Support Command's Journalist of the Year. Sir Jesse has a master's degree in education and teaches in the DeKalb County school system in Georgia. He has contributed on many levels in the community. McNulty facilitates a weekly support group called Trans and Friends and is a member of the Feminist Outlaws since 2003. On several occasions, McNulty has participated in the Atlanta Pride's Color Guard. He is one of the founding members of the Georgia Safe Schools Coalition and each year speaks and plays taps at the Atlanta Transgender Day of Remembrance. Calpurnia Adams is probably one of the most well-known transsexuals in the world. In the late 1980s, she enlisted in the Navy to escape a strict fundamentalist household. She served 4 years as a field medical combat specialist, first stationed in the Middle East during the Gulf War, then later in Adak, Alaska. After Adams was discharged, she moved to Nashville, Tennessee to eventually work as an entertainer in the city's largest drag club. In 1999, she fell in love with a young soldier stationed at Fort Campbell by the name of Barry Winchell. On the 4th of July weekend of that year, Winchell was brutally beaten to death by a fellow soldier who was egged on by another soldier. He was beaten to death simply because he was dating a transsexual woman. Their love story and Winchell's murder was the subject of the 2003 award-winning movie, Soldier's Girl. Today, Adams is one of the trans community's most respected spokeswomen for equality. She has won countless awards for her positive image of our community and our work to help others in becoming who they are. This is the end of Part 2 of the Transgender and Transsexual Veterans of America. In Part 3, we will see more stories of transgender and transsexual veterans and some of the issues they face in the VA. Thank you.